Kevin Moore here from timba.com with an introduction to Beyond Salsa Bass Volume 2, Arsenio, Cachao, and the Golden Age. The Golden Age of the 1950s was the high watermark for the worldwide popularity of Latin music, with a tremendous array of artists all peaking simultaneously in Cuba. The big bands of Pérez Prado, Orquestas-Riverside, and Beny Moré, the charangas of Aragón, Fajardo, América, Sublime, and Sensación, the conjuntos Modelo, and Chappottín y sus estrellas, and Sonora Matancera with the young Celia Cruz. The Latin music boom extended well beyond Cuba, with Tito Puente, Tito Rodríguez, and Machito and his Afro-Cubans holding court at the Palladium in New York, while Cortijo, Ismael Rivera, and Cesar Concepcion combined son with elements of bomba and plena to create a thriving scene in Puerto Rico. Meanwhile, Havana's legendary descarga sessions paved the way for what we now call Latin jazz, and Los Muñequitos de Matanzas brought authentic rumba and Afro-Cuban folkloric music into the mainstream for the first time. But in terms of pure musical genius and innovation, the term Golden Age might be even more accurately applied to the 1940s, and in particular to the extended families of musicians who worked with the two key band leaders of the 1940s, Arsenio Rodríguez and Antonio Arcaño. Beyond Salsa Bass Volume 2 breaks down into 4 large sections. As always, we begin with a theory chapter. In the theory chapter of Volume 1, we studied a grid of 16 generic clave-neutral bass tumbaos. While these two-beat symmetrical patterns continue to be used even to this day, it was in the 1940s that Arsenio and Cachao began to double the length of the bass tumbao rhythm, allowing for both clave alignment and song-specific hook tumbaos. After explaining the 3 common ways that a bass tumbao can be aligned to the clave, we move on to an extensive study of cierres, the rhythmic breaks that a bassist plays with the percussionists in order to segue to a new section and often to a new bass tumbao. In Arsenio's groundbreaking arrangements, these cierres were used to transition from an instrumental solo to what Arsenio called the diablo, the progenitor of today's mambo sections. In Chapter 2, we make a systematic study of nearly all of the cierres that Arsenio recorded before leaving Cuba. Here in Chapter 1, we explain how you can build your own original cierres using syncopation and cross rhythms. Each exercise in Chapter 1 cycles between a cierre and the standard guaracha bass tumbao. In this example, we start with triplets. In other words, we break the beat into 3 equal parts. To create rhythmic tension, we then divide these 3s into groups of 4. In this case, 3 notes and 1 rest. Once you set up such a pattern, you can further displace it by starting at different points in the clave, and you can orchestrate it by using different percussion sounds or, in the case of the bass, by choosing your notes melodically. If this systematic approach appeals to you, you can find a truly exhaustive study of the concept in the recently published Freedom in the Clave by timba.com's own Ian Stewart and master bassist John Benitez. In Chapter 2, we continue our study of the approximately 150 tracks that Arsenio Rodríguez recorded in Cuba between 1940 and 1952. Judged by almost any metric, these are among the most innovative, influential, and euphorically enjoyable recordings of the 20th century. If you're not already a fanatic Arsenio-phile, you're in for quite a revelation. Almost all of Arsenio's Cuban output can be acquired with 2 purchases. El Alma de Cuba is a 6-CD box set with 2 extensive and lovingly crafted booklets packed with all sorts of fascinating information. If you add the legendary Session CD, you'll have every known recording except for 2 tremendous tracks from 1948, currently available at the International Timba Conspiracy Channel, and the Holy Grail session of 1943, featuring Llora Timbero, that Arsenio fans around the world have been searching for years. This chapter turned out to be one of my favorite parts of the entire Beyond Salsa project. The 12 years of Arsenio's Cuban period are a journey, like the 13 Beatles albums or the 16 Beethoven quartets. If you work your way through them slowly in chronological order, they reveal more and more insights and musical treasures with each listening. The approach for this particular pass was to create a section for every Arsenio track that uses the innovative cierres diablos format, 55 tracks in total. Because the 78 RPM records of the day only allowed for about 3.5 minutes per side, each arrangement was a zero-sum game. If Arsenio wanted to feature a long piano solo, he might have to leave out the canto altogether. This chart shows all of the possible sections of an Arsenio arrangement in their most common order. In live performance, of course, the artificial time limit wouldn't apply. A little earlier in this video, I called the 1943 Llora Timbero session the Holy Grail, but the real Holy Grail would be an Arsenio concert or a live radio air check from the late 1940s. I'll post a concert report as soon as that time machine I ordered online arrives. For each of the 55 songs studied, we begin with a header showing the date, clave direction, key, tempo, composer, lead vocalist, and instrumental soloists. Arsenio nearly always had his trumpeters solo between the coros in the main montuno section, and sometimes during the diablo, while the main solo was usually taken by Arsenio himself on tres or one of the many virtuoso pianists who played with the group. We then study the bass tumbaos and the cierre itself. At first, Arsenio usually had the bassist return to the main tumbao for the diablo section, but later he began to introduce more than one distinctive bass tumbao per arrangement. In the first 6 years of his recording career, Arsenio essentially redefined Latin popular music and set the stage for the rest of the century. But an even more transcendent period began in 1946 with the arrival of Arsenio's musical soulmate, pianist-composer Lili Martinez, recommended for the job by his predecessor, Rubén González. Returning to my Beatles analogy, this was a creative chemistry that far surpassed the sum of its parts. By 1948, Arsenio and Lili were so deep in the creative zone that almost every bar of every track contained some glorious musical gem. Here's a painfully short medley of hooks from this period to whet your appetite.
No quiero que me llores, que me digas, papacito de mi alma, eres mi vida. Tú sabes que ese disco está rayado, ya de oírlo tengo ganas, todo es mentira. No me llores, no me llores más. Dum dum danza, siempre vamos, dum dum danza, en broma de ahora. ¡Oye, cómo! En broma de ahora. Esos fueron dos rivales que por verdad que Pueblo Nuevo se pasó bongo. Se pasó bongo. Se pasó bongo. La verdad que Pueblo Nuevo se pasó bongo. Me voy a morir de amor. Me voy a morir de amor. Me voy a morir de amor. Aliciente de mi amor. Calma mi dolor.
We'll close out our brief tour of Chapter 2 with Tintorera Ya Llegó, one of those songs that makes life worth living. It has a canto that's a pop song masterpiece in and of itself,
Tintorera ya llegó, guajacones pa' la orilla, le temen a la ballena, le temen al tiburón, le temen a la conúa, le temen a la tonina, pero si llega Tintorera, guajacones pa' la orilla. Tintorera ya llegó.
a whole tone scale cierre that predates Stevie Wonder's Don't You Worry About a Thing by 25 years. An absolutely anarchistic chromatic diablo,
Tintorera ya llegó. Tintorera ya llegó. Tintorera ya llegó. Tintorera ya llegó.
and an epic Lili Martinez piano solo.
Guajacones pa' la orilla.
In Chapter 3, we turn to the other titanic band of the 1940s, Arcaño y sus Maravillas, a group that often played the same concert bills as Arsenio and was featured on back-to-back weekly radio shows. Among many others, the Maravillas Alumni Club includes Cachao and Orestes Lopez, the great pianist Jesus Lopez, percussionist Tata Guines, Ulpiano Diaz, and Gustavo Tamayo, violinist-composers Enrique Jorin and Felix Reina, and Jose Fajardo himself. Arsenio had expanded the son septeto to a conjunto by adding piano, congas, and additional trumpets. Arcaño y sus Maravillas grew out of the danzón tradition, with flute, violins, and timbales, adding a montuno section with layered riffs to create a new genre called danzón mambo. Although he himself was a tres player, Arsenio Rodríguez was arguably the most important figure of the 20th century in terms of composing bass tumbaos and redefining the role of the bass in popular music. But when it came to actually playing the bass, Israel Cachao Lopez stood alone, well deserving of the many accolades he's received over the years. We study his tumbaos with Arcaño, his huge musical family, and his composing career, as well as diving into the high-profile Cachao-related controversies that have gathered so much attention, the word mambo, Cachao's role in the history of mambo, and the controversial series of songs that led to the various versions of that ubiquitous Latin anthem, Oye Como Va. We conclude Chapter 3 with two complete Cachao transcriptions, Doña Olga, and Cachao's Sublime Danzón Buena Vista Social Club, from which the movie draws its name. Looking ahead, Beyond Salsa Bass Volume 3 is the longest book in the series at 440 pages with 460 audio examples. It includes huge chapters on the roots of Latin jazz, Puerto Rico, New York, and Cuba between the Cuban Revolution and the Timba Revolution.